Can you imagine your life where money is your friend, working with you to achieve all your dreams and desires? If you struggle seeing money as your friend, then join Kathy Cook Noble, financial advisor and educator on understanding how your money can work for you. It is possible. Now, here is Financially Speaking with Kathy Cook Noble.
Welcome to the show, everyone. It's good to be back. I'm Ashley Quinn Hogan. I'm going to be your host for this evening. And I'm excited to move into this episode with you. We got some exciting things on the agenda for tonight. It's October, it's fall, it's a new season, which is fabulous. It means people went back to school. Some of us physically, some of us, via technology, but I think we're all at a place where we were ready for that adjustment back into school. I know I was anyway. And on tonight's episode, we're going to kind of stick with that theme of, moving, transitioning through life and moving from one avenue to the other. On tonight's episode, we're going to, try to be inclusive of everyone. So not just our students, not just our youth out there, but also their families and parents and grandparents, even aunts, uncles, you name it. There's no limit on who's included in tonight's episode. But what we're going to talk about tonight is looking at how can we talk finance with our kids, and how can we include our kids in our financial lives. And I say we, I mean, I don't have kids, not yet anyway, but I speak as a child. Not that I'm, a young child, but I'm a former child. I speak as someone who has parents, and, who was part of those financial discussions with parents. And I think that a lot of the times we forget to include our children in our financial discussions. Or we leave them out for an intended purpose, and there's always a method behind our madness, so to speak. But tonight's episode, we're going to look at, why is it important to include our children or our grandchildren or the young people in our lives in financial decisions and in conversations surrounding money and money management and finance and all of that fantastic stuff. So, my question to all our listeners out there is, have you had the talk with your kids? And, I'm going to say the talk, it's not the one that our minds automatically go to. It's the financial talk. Have you had the money talk with your kids? Have you opened a bank account with your kids? Have you discussed what the difference between debit and credit is with your kids? Have you talked about financing your children's education, part-time jobs, summer jobs, anything like that? Have you taken a time out of your life to have those conversations with your kids, no matter how old they are? And, I think the important thing to remember is that, as young kids, we're impressionable and we inherit what we know from our parents. So, to all the parents out there that, you're trying to protect your kids from the scary world of finance and, preserve their youth. I think it's time to, sort of jump in head first and say, what, your kids are going to inherit what they know about money from you. So if you haven't had the chance to have that conversation with your kids, let's get it started tonight, and let's look at, how we can get on board with having that conversation, how we can start it, why it's important to have it, and what the ultimate goal of having that conversation with your children is. So that's, the purpose of tonight's episode. And, with that, the conversation is something that needs to be open, and it needs to be, influential, meaning that your kids need to be a part of it, and they need to be an active part of it. So it's not so much as, lecturing your kids on, what a ledger is, or, what a bank account is, or anything like that. It's just bringing them into the part of your life and your everyday spending habits. And with that comes another question is, if you haven't had the chat with your kids, or even if you have you had the chat with yourself? And I think that that's an important question too, because a lot of us, we sort of go with the motions through our lives, and we haven't necessarily taken the time to talk to ourselves about our own spending habits or our own understanding or our own knowledge. And that's, a big part of why I want to, made it a point at the beginning of this episode that everyone's included in this discussion. So whether, you're some type of finance manager and you know everything there is to know about money, whether you, don't even have your own bank account and you have no idea how to start one, or what any of the financial lingo is, everyone's included. And that's the important part, is it's never too early or too late to start. The point is just getting started with having that conversation. And with families, there's sort of a lot that can be said about money, and there's a lot that can be learned. And I think the family dynamic is a really awesome opportunity to teach our kids about what financial independence looks like, the importance of financial independence, sort of what money management looks like, budgeting, and how to delay your gratification so that you can achieve those long-term financial goals, whether that be post-secondary education, a home in the future, a trip, a car, some item of value to you. How do our kids know how to save for those things if we don't teach them? Does money just fall out of the sky and pay for their education? Do they just get given a house one day? We all know that that's not the case. So now's the time to sit down with our kids, no matter how young or old, and discuss these things with them, or at least bring them into our lives, our financial lives, so that they can have a look kind of behind the curtains and see where the house comes from, where the food comes from, where the bill, like how the bills are paid, where all these luxury items come from, so that we're setting them up for success in the future. And that's the main thing, is we have to prepare our kids for a life that doesn't necessarily include us. And I mean, not trying to get into the dark depths here, but at the end of the day, that's our goal, right? Is to prepare our kids for a life beyond childhood, beyond having mom and dad there to sort of walk them through, because eventually they're going to have families of their own, and we want them to be as successful and as financially independent and as financially well off as we can. And if we're sort of delaying that conversation surrounding money, how can we expect our kids to just achieve financial independence and financial literacy and all these positive things surrounding money? How can we expect them to achieve that on their own? So that's the bare bones of what we're going to get into tonight. And I'm going to follow up with another question, and that's, do we want our kids to be dependent or independent? And that's sort of where this really, where this comes from, this money management conversation, is, take a second to actually ask yourself and to reflect on this question. Do you want your kids to be independent, or do you want them to be dependent? Meaning, do you want them to have all of the tools and the knowledge they need to support themselves and their families and their lives, over the next 5, 10, 15, 60 years? Do you want them to be independent, or do you want them to have to depend on someone, whether that be you, a family member, a spouse? And, that's the main point here, is I think the majority of us, if not all of us, could say that we'd want our kids to be independent. And for those of us that are the kids, I think that we would want to say that we want to be independent as well. And that independence isn't something that just happens on its own. It's something we have to foster, and we have to teach our kids, what this independence looks like and how we achieve it, and how we achieve it in a way that is productive for us and for our lives. And, it's okay if we haven't started, giving our kids that independence. If our kids have been dependent on us for, the past few years, or, the past few decades, that's okay. There's absolutely no judgment surrounding that, but, it's going to come to a point where we have to push them forward, and we have to work with our kids and teach them about money management and financial literacy and all of that, amazing stuff that is scary to think about, but can open the doors to like so much independence in your child's life and in their future. And we need to consider that, our kids, they're not, I say kids, and I know we think children, but, they're not going to be children forever. They're going to have adult responsibilities and adult sized bills and, mortgages and car payments and student loans and all of that stuff. And we have to prepare them to be ready to pay for that. Nothing's free in society anymore, and it's just going to keep getting more and more expensive, as time goes on. And one of the main things that young adults are struggling with right now is purchasing their first homes, or putting a down payment on a home, or even financing a car, or things like that. It's so incredibly difficult these days for young adults to have that money set aside to do those things. But wouldn't it be great if by the time your children were 25, 26, 27 years old, they had that. They had the money set aside to put a down payment on a house, or they had money set aside to, go on the trip of their dreams, or to pay off their student loans. Like, wouldn't that just be, the most amazing thing in the world? I think so. I mean, and for those of us that are the young adults, who are the kids, who are the students, wouldn't that be amazing to have that? One of the greatest gifts I think that we can give our kids is financial independence. And it might sound cliche, but it's cliche because it's true. You get to the end of your academic career, and you have, for those of us that are students, I mean, if we're not, then that's also fine. We're, other things accumulate debt as well, car payments, all kinds of living expenses. But, I use tuition because it's a popular one, and it's one that's, insanely expensive. But wouldn't it be great to get to the end of your degree and know that you have been saving money to pay off the student loans that you accumulated, or that you have a plan to pay off those student loans over the next, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And, I think as parents, we have some responsibility to make sure that that's the case for our children. So, how can we do that? How can we set our children up to be successful in their future? And that's the main point of having the financial conversation with your kids. It's not to scare them, it's not to burden them. It's to inform them, and it's to set them up to be the absolute most successful that they can be, in adulthood, and with their finances and with their personal life. But so when we come back, and we're going to get ready to head into our first break here, but when we get back, we're going to look a little bit at what the conversation looks like, and how we should be having the conversation, and what the conversation should be about. But we'll head into our first break of the show. You're listening to Financially Speaking on the Inspired Choices Network. I'm Ashley Quinn Hogan. I'm your host for this evening, and we'll be right back after this break.
Too many of us get caught up in the unreal lives of reality television and complete to acquire stuff, which is setting us up to accumulate lots of debt. We're scared, confused, and don't know who to talk to. By tuning into Financially Speaking radio show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble, you'll learn tips you can use to improve your financial health, which in turn can improve your overall health and make for a very happy life. Live a life you can afford and enjoy. It is possible. Listen for Financially Speaking radio show every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. This is the Financially Speaking Show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble. To participate in the program, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email by sending to Kathy@bookkeepplus.ca. Now back to the program.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. I'm Ashley Quinn Hogan. I'm your host for this evening, and you're listening to Financially Speaking on the Inspired Choices Network. Before we headed off into our first break, we were just chatting about, having the conversation with our kids, the financial conversation that is, and what that looks like and why it's important. And, if we haven't had it, that's okay. But, now's the time. And, I do want to reiterate one point. It's that if we feel that, as parents, if we feel that, we're not at a place to instill that knowledge in our kids, if we feel that we don't have enough knowledge ourselves to pass along to our kids, that's absolutely okay. There's plenty of ways to acquire that knowledge. And if you're listening to this podcast, I mean, you're taking the first step. What's not okay is to realize that you don't have that knowledge and to not do anything about it. Because that's not only affecting you and your financial future, but it's affecting your children and their financial future. And, for most of us, we want to make sure that we're setting our kids up to be successful as they possibly can. So, it's like the classic example of, being on a flight that's, going down. The flight attendant always says to secure your own mask first and then secure the mask of your children. So, we don't expect if you're a parent that has no knowledge of finance and money management, financial literacy to, secure the mask on your child first, you got to secure that mask on yourself. So you have to take the time to reflect and on whether you have that knowledge or not. And if you don't, then seek it out. And if you do, then great, you can pass it along to your children. So, why is this conversation about money so important? And I think, today is a good example of, why having this conversation, is so important for our children. The money conversation, it always elicits a lot of anxiety. Even as adults, there's things cost so much money, and half the time we don't know where that money is coming from. With the recent pandemic, we saw the housing market skyrocket. We saw issues with car manufacture and, all these things that are adult responsibilities. How are we going to, purchase a house when, everything's going for triple what it was, 6 months ago? Or how are we going to finance a car when the used car market is, basically garbage at this point, right? It's a scary thing to think about, not having enough money or not having the means to acquire the money that you need to live the lifestyle you want. But it doesn't have to be. And I think that the biggest disservice we can do to our children is to instill in them a fear of financial literacy. Because I don't think that's anyone's intention. I think that's just something that we've developed, but that it's time to kind of knock it off, right? Not having conversations about money in front of our children, it's like the fear of the unknown, right? If your kids don't know anything about money, it's something that becomes fearful and scary to them. And, I know for the most part, finance and money and bills, they can be a big part of, a stressful living situation, or they can be, the cause of stress and tension in the family. But I think the more we include our children in those conversations and in our financial lives, the less that's true. If whatever, little Billy sees, mom and dad, stressing out about, making a mortgage payment or a car payment, and he's never a part of those conversations, then, it might be the case that he just assumes that, everything that costs money, every type of bill, is stressful and is bad, and you should stay away from managing money and budgeting and paying bills. And all that stuff. But if we sit down with our children and explain to them, how to allocate money in the family, where money for rent or mortgage or car payment comes from, and how those things are bills that we take care of before, trips and luxury items and shopping and all of that. I think it instills a responsibility in our kids, but it also sort of eliminates this anxiety that has become a big part of our society. And that's sort of the number one reason why this conversation is important, is we want to sort of eliminate any fear or anxiety there is around money. I know for the most part, a lot of us have that. So maybe that's something we should address first, is the fear, the anxiety that we ourselves have surrounding money, because it doesn't have to be a scary thing. It can be something that is motivating, can be something that, having a good financial literacy, or managing your money appropriately, can be rewarding and positive and all of those great things. So I think that the main objective here is to teach our kids those positive, rewarding things, that hey, working hard for your money pays off. You buy these trips and nice houses and cars and all of that, and post-secondary, all of these goals that we have for ourselves and our kids. That's the purpose of money. That's why we make money, is to buy those things and to enjoy our lives. So I think that letting our kids know that hey, you can be part of this conversation. It's not something that you should be fearful of or anxious about. Can really go a long way in the the world of financial literacy. And I've said this before in episodes, and I'm going to say it again. If you haven't started, there's no judgment, or there's no shame in that, or there's no need to panic. It's we kind of take it one step at a time. But if you haven't started having that chat with your kids, it's never too late, it's never too early, but the time is now, right? It's not, there's no cutoff. You don't start when they're a certain age. You don't, it's not, once they get to a certain age, it's not too late. It's, now's the time. If you haven't had the chat with your kids yet, I urge you to consider it. And if you haven't had the chat with yourself yet about your own financial literacy and your own knowledge about money management, then, now's the time, because the clock is ticking. But it kind of brings me back to this question I asked earlier. The main goal here is wouldn't it be nice to set your kids up to be as financially independent and as financially successful as possible? And so, I'm going to suggest 3 tips here for how to get started, because we've talked about the importance of getting started, why you should, and at this point, it's okay, we're ready to get started. So what are the tips here? And, I think my main suggestion would be to focus on your family values, right? It's the point of this is not to be, take on a teacher role or a lecture role or anything like that. It's to just bring financial discussions into your family as a whole. And whether that's you and your spouse having discussions with your children, or, if you're a grandparent, having discussions with your children and your grandchildren, or whatever it looks like for you. It doesn't have to look a certain way. No matter how it looks, it's great. But, I think that for kids anyway, it makes the most sense when they have something concrete to focus on. And I think family values is a big one. So maybe, you're a family that goes on a lot of vacations. Well, where does the money from those vacations, where does it come from? I think that's something that we can look at with our kids. Or maybe you're a family that's, a really athletic family, and you play a lot of sports, or you go to a lot of sports games, or, where does that money come from? Right? And how do we finance those things? And how do we determine that, spending money on trips or sporting events is more important to us than spending money on X, Y, or Z? Or maybe, that's not the case, and maybe spending money, in your family, maybe spending money on trips is something that, is a little bit lower on the list, and you like to prioritize other things. It doesn't matter what that looks like for you, but I think that there's some value in bringing our kids into that discussion and saying, our family values this, and this is why, we budget, a certain amount of money towards this, or this is why we make sure that, we want to make money so that we have money to afford these things. going forward, because your children learn from observing you. And if you're taking them on trips to Florida or Disney World or whatever the case is, it's nice to have a lesson alongside that says this is where the money comes from. And if we want to do fun things like take a trip or go to a sporting event, we have to allocate money from some other possible purchase, or we have to make sure that we're saving X amount of dollars every month so that we can have this great trip at the end of the year. And that kind of ties into sort of the second tip that I have for starting this conversation. Make it a family affair. There's no reason it has to be a one-on-one, or you're throwing your kids in the deep end. Make it something that the family looks at as a whole. And for the most part, a lot of us we can pay bills online now and the snap of our fingers, or we go to the grocery store and tap our plastic card, and there's no really exchange of money. It's just the tap of a card these days. But I think that one of the best ways to get your kids involved is to sort of show them what's kind of behind this curtain that we sort of close on them. When we have discussions, about paying a mortgage, or the next big purchase in our family, whether that's going to be a car, maybe it's a new house, maybe it's a vacation, maybe it's a new piece of furniture, a new vehicle of some sort, whatever it is, include your kids in that conversation. Why not? I think a lot of us try to protect our kids from the stress, but I don't think it has to be stressful. So I don't think there's anything to protect our kids from. I think that if, we're sitting down having that conversation with our spouse or ourselves or with a financial advisor or anything like that, why shouldn't our kids be a part of it? Because I think that there's so much to learn from having our kids be a part of those conversations, and sitting down and showing them, the process of bill paying, or the process of budgeting, the process of allocating funds from, X to Y. I think that that's a super, super valuable and important thing. And it's sort of important to seize the day, so to speak, and to take those little moments that we have with our kids to show them, that money doesn't have to be a frightening or a stress-inducing or anxiety-provoking thing. It's just a part of our everyday life. And that's what it boils down to, is it's going to be a part of your kids' everyday life for the rest of their life. So why not get them used to it now, and why not get them comfortable in the world of money? Those are the two biggest tips I have. The third tip, I guess, would be just to give them the chance to earn money. Give them a feeling of what that looks like. If you have older kids that are old enough to work part-time, great. Maybe if you have younger kids, just give them the chance to have some form of income, whether it's from doing chores around the house, or doing the odd job with you or your spouse, or with a grandparent or a family member or a friend. Give them the opportunity to learn, because earning money is fun, and it's going to be something that they're going to probably be doing for the rest of their life. So why not give them the chance to feel what that's like? And then once, kids are earning money, it opens the doors to, okay, well, now that we're earning money, how do we save? How do we budget? How do we choose what we're going to spend our money on? And it can start off small, and then it gets into the world of, well, what is a bank account going to look like? What about a savings account? What do investments look like? What is a big purchase you want to have in the future? And just starting your kids off early with the opportunities to earn can open so many doors for them for the future. So those are the three biggest tips I have. Make it a family affair, give your kids the opportunity to earn, and sort of focus on your family values and how to integrate those values into the discussion. So when we come back, we're going to talk about sort of what is the outcome of teaching our kids about financial literacy and money management. What are some of the things we can achieve? But we're going to take another break. And when we get back, we'll get into it a little bit more.
Too many of us get caught up in the unreal lives of reality television and complete to acquire stuff, which is setting us up to accumulate lots of debt. We're scared, confused, and don't know who to talk to. By tuning into Financially Speaking radio show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble, you'll learn tips you can use to improve your financial health, which in turn can improve your overall health and make for a very happy life. Live a life you can afford and enjoy. It is possible. Listen for Financially Speaking radio show every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. Money is complicated, right? Actually, no, it's not. You don't have to be a trader on Wall Street to get a handle on your money. TV shows often instill fear to keep you believing you can't understand it or do anything yourself. If dealing with your finances brings up a lot of other F words, then you need to read All Ladies Should Use the F Word, A Guide to Loving Your Finances by Kathy Cook Noble. Kathy helps you take control of your finances and leave the other F word, fear, in the dust.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is the Financially Speaking Show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble. To participate in the program, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email by sending to Kathy@bookkeepplus.ca. Now back to the program.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. I'm Ashley Quinn Hogan. I'm your host for this evening. You're listening to Financially Speaking on the Inspired Choices Network. Before we went into our second break, we were just chatting about some of the tips for having the conversations with your kids, and what that conversation can look like in terms of giving your kids the chance to earn, bringing them into discussions about money, having discussions with regard to what your family values. And I think the important thing to remember is if you feel that you don't necessarily have the knowledge to instill these learning opportunities into your kids, or you're not confident that what you're sharing is going to be beneficial to your kids, I urge you to just to do it anyway, because you think it may not be useful. However, your kids learn a lot from observing, and they may learn something that's useful to them later on, even if it's not useful to them at this specific moment. And this conversation, it boils down to the younger you are, the more time you have. So whether that's your own age as a parent or a grandparent, or whether that's your children, is the younger you are, the more time you have to make mistakes, to learn, and to have money grow, things like that. And that's the most important thing is right now, our kids, they have time on their side. So the messages that we instill and the values that we instill in them surrounding money management and financial literacy, they can carry with them for the rest of their lives. And it's also the same as if we instill negative habits or fears or anything. Those are things that they can carry with them for the rest of their lives as well. And I think that that's something we don't want, is this anxiety or this fear surrounding money when it's something that's not necessary. So having these conversations and bringing the discussion of money and finance into our everyday lives can open the door up for comfort and success and independence later on. And I think that's the most important thing for our kids is to give them that chance to be financially independent, and to also, have the knowledge to, support themselves, long after, our time with them is up. And so one of the most important things, in my life and in a lot of young adults' lives is education. And I know this isn't the case for everyone, but it's something that I thought would be worth addressing. How can we help our kids finance their education? And that's, sort of a big thing that this early conversation surrounding money can help with is, there's going to become a point in our kids' lives where they have to make the decision. Do they want to go to university? Do they want to go to college? Do they want to go to work? And, I think a big part of that and the big part of the decision is, where is the money for that going to come from? There's a number of avenues, that can be taken in order to achieve that goal, if it's a goal of yours or if it's a goal of your children's. But, where does the money to pay for 4 years of a degree, sometimes 6, maybe it's 8, depending on what you want to do, where does that money come from? And, is that going to influence our decision on whether we do this or not? And I know that's a big thing for a lot of people, is the fear of not being, either not being able to pay for their tuition or their school fees up front, or, having the opportunity to have a loan, but being fearful of how they're going to pay that off later. I know that, that can be a make or break decision on whether, if someone, goes on and continues in their education or not. And, to me, that's a serious thing is, if I'll ask the parents out there this, and even the kids out there, if, how would it feel if you had, a kid who really, was intellectually gifted and they had all these aspirations and they wanted to go to university, but they were so fearful of not being able to fund it or, pay off their student loans after the fact, that they decided they were just going to go to work instead. And they didn't, achieve any of the goals that they wanted to because of, this fear. So I think that this conversation starting early with our kids can help to break down these barriers, so that by the time the opportunity to, go forward and get an education, or further their education anyway, whether that be in college or university or some professional school, trade school, whether it is in the workplace, so that becomes a possibility for them. Because I think the last thing we want to do is shut any of the doors on our kids. We want them to have as many opportunities as possible, and having these financial discussions with our kids, I think only, opens those doors further, to what they can achieve. And I guess some of the major points here with how can we help our kids, save for an education or finance an education. The big one here again is to start early, right? Start saving early. If you haven't started an education fund for your children yet, or if you're a student and you don't know if your parents have started an education fund, have the conversation. Have the conversation with your child. If you have started an education fund, let them know. Tell them that, this money is set aside for whatever it is that you want to do, whether it's university or college, or if you want to go to work, or whatever, your intentions for your kid is, or what their intentions for their own future is. Have that conversation and let them know, there's a education fund put in place for you, or there's not, but let's get one started. Or if you're a student and you want to have that conversation with your parents, hey, mom and dad, have you guys started an education fund for me? If yes, great. If not, how can we get one started? Because like I said before, it's never too early. It's never too late. If you haven't started, start now. That's the main thing is it's time to get started. And, another important thing about education is that it's expensive. And so, I think it's valuable to teach our kids about loans and investments, because I think that loans and investments, they've played a big part in my education, and not to generalize, but I think that they play a big part in a lot of people's education. And we hear these stories about, people who are paying off their student loans, 20, 30 years down the road. And I think that that scares a lot of people. I know that that scares the life out of me. But it doesn't have to be like that, and it doesn't have to be scary. So, when you start saving earlier, you start, realizing what resources are out there for you to fund your education. I think that that's an important thing as well. And it kind of ties into the point that I mentioned about sometimes, not being able to financially support yourself, in your education, or not knowing when or how you're going to be able to pay off those student loans can play a big part in your decision to either go or not go to college or university or whatever. But if it's a goal of yours and it's an aspiration, we want to make sure that it's possible for you. And whether that's, money that you have that you've saved, whether that's money that your parents have that they've saved, or whether that comes from a government loan or a bank loan, or an investment. What are the options? I know a lot of people don't know. I know a lot of my classmates and my friends, either they had no idea, how they're going to pay off their student loans when they're done. They never had the discussion with their parents about what paying back a loan looks like. They didn't realize that a loan was something they had to pay back. Or they didn't realize that maybe their parents did pay for their education, but they're expecting, their child to pay a portion of it back to them. Money doesn't just fall out of the sky. It would be nice if it did. You wouldn't hear me complaining, but it's really, really important to know that, at the end of the day, there is resources out there to utilize if you want to, pursue education, further education. And, there's ways of doing it that aren't horrifying or that aren't scary. So, the sooner we have those conversations with our kids about loans, repayment of loans, investments, and how investments can be, something that's so critical to the repayment of loans or to the financing of our future. I think that that's an absolutely crucial point in having these conversations with our kids. Another thing that I know I've mentioned on this show before is the importance of delayed gratification. And that's a big one for kids, is because, we always see our parents, like everything now is on a plastic card. They go to the grocery store, they tap a plastic card. You go to the movies, you tap a plastic card. You go to the bookstore, you tap a plastic card. There's no actual exchange of money, virtually. I mean, there's the odd instance, but everything now is on a credit card or a debit card. And it's just, we can have, anything in the blink of an eye. We have online shopping now. If I want, strawberries, I can have them, delivered to my door in 20 minutes if I wanted to. If I need a new, pair of shoes, I can order them online and have them here in, about a week tops. And there's no exchange of dollars and cents. So I think that it's really important to tease out what happens behind the curtain, what happens when you tap the plastic card, what happens when you press, proceed to check out on the computer. What does that look like? And, that money that's being used is being taken away from something that it can be used for later. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I mean, it's a decision that needs to be made. So whether you choose to spend that money now on a new pair of shoes, or, go see a new, Avengers movie, or whatever the case is, or whether you save that money for university, a trip, a car, down payment on a house. It's the delayed gratification. If you can't have both, it's either, you have something now and you enjoy it in this moment, or you maybe, don't have exactly everything you want right at this moment, but you're setting yourself up to have everything you want in the future. And that's the main thing is, if you're not spending it now, how can you allocate it somewhere more useful? Or if you are spending it now, what is that going to take away from you in the future? And when it comes to education, that's a big thing. Is that an end goal of yours? Is that something you're going to want to do? Is that something, if you're a parent, you want your kids to do, or you think they'll want to do? Then let's have a conversation about delayed gratification with our kids too. And talk to them about how we can, save a little bit now, maybe invest a little bit now, but have everything that we want maybe not everything, but have something, a big thing like education that we want a little bit later on. And so, financing our kids' education is a big part of this conversation. And I say education, but that can be anything. If an education, you don't see that in your kids' future, they don't see it, I should say, work or a car or a house, how can we save now so that we have the money later? And that's a big part of the conversation as well. But we're going to get ready to head into our last break of the show here. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the positive messages to instill in our children surrounding money and money management. But I'm Ashley Quinn Hogan, and I'm the host for this evening. You're listening to Financially Speaking on the Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after a short break.
Too many of us get caught up in the unreal lives of reality television and complete to acquire stuff, which is setting us up to accumulate lots of debt. We're scared, confused, and don't know who to talk to. By tuning into Financially Speaking radio show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble, you'll learn tips you can use to improve your financial health, which in turn can improve your overall health and make for a very happy life. Live a life you can afford and enjoy. It is possible. Listen for Financially Speaking radio show every Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is the Financially Speaking Show with financial advisor and educator Kathy Cook Noble. To participate in the program, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email by sending to Kathy@bookkeepplus.ca. Now back to the program.
Alrighty, so we're coming back now from our break. Before we went on to our break, we were chatting about some of the highlights of getting involved in our kids' education and helping our kids finance their education. And today's episode, we've kind of hit a lot of points about having the conversation with our kids. Have you talked finance with them? Have you talked finance with yourself? Why have that conversation? How to have that conversation? What are the benefits of having that conversation? And I think that the main point here is that if you haven't had the conversation with your kids yet, don't freak out about it. Don't worry about it. But, let's work towards having that conversation. No matter where you fall in the spectrum of financial literacy, whether you know everything in the world there is to know or whether you know nothing, most of us fall somewhere in between that. But let's prepare ourselves to, have that conversation with our kids so that no matter where we fall in the spectrum, our kids can fall somewhere ahead of us, so that they can be, even better than we are in terms of money management and financial literacy and understanding the world of money. And I know we talked about, independence and dependency. Like, do you want your kids to have that, financial independence, when the time comes for them to move out, to buy a home, to start their own family, to start an education, to start, working, as a part of the workforce, right? Like, do you want your kids to be dependent on you forever, or like a spouse, or do you want them to be independent, to have that ability to stand on their own and to know, how to spend money, how to save money, how to invest money, and how to be confident in doing so. And we had this conversation about the anxiety surrounding money and the fear. And it doesn't have to be that way, right? And I talk a lot about the fear of the unknown, because in a lot of ways we try to protect our children from discussions surrounding finance and money, because it can be stressful and it can be anxiety provoking. But the main message is that it doesn't have to. And I think the more we talk with our kids about financial literacy and saving and investing and delayed gratification, and supporting themselves financially, I think, the more that anxiety reduces and the more that fear sort of goes away, because it's something that is never gonna leave, this, ability or this need to to finance our lives and to spend money and to make money and to save money and to invest money. It's something that's never going to go away. And, if anything, it's just going to become, more relevant to us over the next, decade, 2-3 decades. And so let's give our kids the best shot possible at, being financially independent and achieving everything they want, and having a life where they can buy what they need and they can save for what they want. I think that's something that's so incredibly valuable. But some messages to instill in our children that I think are important, and you may have your own, and then that's fantastic, but a few here that can start us off on this discussion. And the point of having this discussion is, I talked about it already, delayed gratification. Instill in your kids that money doesn't just fall out of trees, and you can't have everything now and everything later. There's a value in sort of saving money for, an end goal. When you reach that end goal, it's so pleasurable to just know that you worked hard and you saved and you invested, or whatever that looks like, to achieve that outcome that you wanted. So maybe it's post-secondary, maybe it's a house, maybe it's a down payment on a car, whatever it is. There's a lot of value in knowing that, as a child or as a young adult, that you had the ability to delay your gratification to achieve that goal. But on the flip side, it's not about just being, grateful later on and, receiving that gratification later on. It's also about, maybe, saving now and not having absolutely everything you could think of right now, and knowing that that money has to be allocated somewhere. It doesn't, you can't have X and Y. So you need to have, figure out what's more important to you. And that's where the family values come in, and having those conversations about what's valuable to you and your family, and, what money management looks like for you as, as a team and as a group. Because at the end of the day, we don't want our kids to feel isolated or alone. We want them to feel like they're part of a family and part of a group, that knows what they value. And, where that comes in, the second point comes in is, to instill in our kids is it something you want or is it something you need, right? We all want a lot of things, but we have to, at some point be mature enough to say that wants come after needs. And so sit down with your children and make sure they understand that, these are all the things as a family that we need. So this is where money gets allocated first. And then after that, we look at what we want. And, that's where this flexibility comes in. Is it something you want now, or is it something you may want in the future? And, that's an important, sort of self-discipline that you can, instill in your kids. And, discipline in this instance is, I think it gets a negative connotation, but it's never a bad thing. Self-discipline is a very positive thing. So, giving yourself and your kids the knowledge behind what self-discipline looks like in terms of money management, I think can be super beneficial. And teaching them that, just because it's something we want right now, that money comes from somewhere, and it's either, we spend that money now, or we save it, we spend it later. But either way, these are the things that we need, to pay bills, to eat, all these other things. And that's what, takes the priority. And then I think the last super important thing to instill in our kids, especially, in today's economy, is the value of work. I know we talked about giving your kids the opportunity to earn money. And I think that's more important today than it's ever been, because your kids are going to be working for, I'm going to say the rest of their lives, but I know we all have the goal of retiring at some point, but we want to set ourselves up to retire on time or early, or whatever the case is. And I think the same goes for our kids is, we want them to retire, on time or early, and, instilling this message of, the value of work, and that working is something that pays off. And, the money from work, we have to work in order to finance these things that we need and these things that we want, whether it be a short-term goal or a long-term goal like education. So if you haven't had the chat with your kids yet, I urge you to do so. If you haven't had the chat with yourself, I urge you to have that conversation first. And that's, I hope hope you learned a lot.
Thank you for choosing to listen to Financially Speaking Radio Show. Kathy Cook Noble will return next Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Mountain, and 1 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. We hope you'll join us. Until then, have the best week of your life by making the choices that bring you all that you desire.